In a rebellious colony visit to VRYBURG during the Boer occupation, I pass off as a Dutchman's sister. The days are so long, and there are so many of them. MAURIER. During the weeks I remained at Mosita, the only book I had to read was Trilby, which I perused many times, and the lament of the heroine in the line quoted above seemed to re-echo my sentiments. For days and days we were absolutely without news. It is impossible after a lapse of time to realize exactly what that short sentence really means. I must ask my readers to remember that we talked and thought of one topic only. We looked incessantly in the one direction by which messengers might come. Our nerves were so strained that, did we but see one of the natives running across the yard, or hear them conversing in louder tones than usual, we at once thought there must be news, and jumped up from any occupation with which we were trying to beguile the time, only to sink back on our chairs again disappointed. As for knowing what was passing in the world, one might as well have been in another planet. We saw no papers, and there was not much prospect of obtaining any. Before the war we had all talked lightly of wires being cut and railway lines pulled up, but in truth, I do not think anyone realized what these two calamities really meant. My only comfort was the reflection that, no matter how hard they were fighting in Mafeking, they could not be suffering the terrible boredom that we were enduring. To such an extent in this monotony did I lose the count of time that I had to look in the almanac to be able to say in biblical language, "The evening and the morning were the sixth day." At length one evening, when we were sitting on the stoop after supper, we descried a rider approaching on a very tired horse. Rushing to the gate, we were handed letters from Mafeking. It can be imagined how we devoured them. They told of 3 determined attacks on the town on the 3rd day after I had left, all successfully repulsed, and of a bombardment on the following Monday. The latter had been somewhat of a farce, and had done no damage, except to 1 or 2 buildings which, by an irony of fate, included the Dutch church and hotel and the convent. The shells were of such poor quality that they were incapable of any explosive force whatever. 26. After 9 hours' bombardment, although some narrow escapes were recorded, the only casualties were 1 chicken killed and 1 dog wounded. An emissary from Commandant Snyman had then come solemnly into the town under a flag of truce, to demand an unconditional surrender, to avoid further bloodshed. Colonel Baden-Powell politely replied that as far as he was concerned, operations had not begun. The messenger was given refreshment at Dixon's Hotel, where lunch was laid out as usual. This had astonished him considerably, as presumably he had expected to find but few survivors. He was then sent about his business. Gordon, who imagined me at Settler Gully, concluded his letter by saying the colonel had informed General Cronje of my presence at Mrs. Fraser's, and begged him to leave me unmolested. This news, which had come by a Daily Mail correspondent, on his way south to send off cables, was satisfactory as far as it went, and we at once dispatched a trusty old nigger called Bose with a tiny note, folded microscopically in an old cartridge case, to give the garrison news of the surrounding country. This old man proved a reliable and successful messenger. On many occasions he penetrated the cordon into the beleaguered town, and during the first 2 months he was practically the sole means they had of receiving news. His task was of course a risky one, and we used to pay him £3 each way, but he never failed us. Now commenced a fresh period of anxious waiting, and during this time I had leisure and opportunity to study the characteristics of these Boer farmers and their wives, and to learn what a curious race they are. Mrs. Keeley told me a great deal of their ideas, habits and ways, in which low cunning is combined with extreme curiosity and naive simplicity. Many of the fathers and sons in the neighbourhood had slunk off to fight across the border, sending meanwhile their wives and daughters to call on Mrs. Keeley and condole with her in what they termed her trouble, and to ascertain at the same time all the circumstances of the farm and domestic circle. A curious thing happened one day. Directly after breakfast, an old Shandridan drove up with a typical Dutch family as occupants. Mrs. Keeley, busy with household matters, pulled a long face, knowing what was before her. No questions as to being at home, disengaged, or follies of that sort were asked. The horses were solemnly outspanned and allowed to roam. The family party had come to spend the day. Seated gravely in the dining room, they were refreshed by coffee and cold meat. Mrs. Keeley remarked to me privately that the best thing to do was to put quantities of food before them and then leave them. and beyond a few passing words as she went in and out of the room, I did not make out that they went in for entertaining each other. So they sat for hours, saying nothing, doing nothing. When Mrs. Keeley wanted me to have lunch, she asked them to remove to the stoop, and in this request they seemed to find nothing strange. Finally, about 5 o'clock they went away, much to the relief of their hostess, not however before the latter had shrewdly guessed the real object of their visit, which was to find out about myself. Report had reached them that Mafeking was in the hands of the Dutch, that the only survivor of the garrison had escaped in woman's clothes, had been wandering on the veldt for days, and had finally been taken in here. Said the old vrouw, I would be afraid to meet him. Is he really here? This remark she made to Mrs. Keeley's brother, who could hardly conceal his amusement, but to reassure her displayed the cart and mules by which I had come. If in England we had heard of the arrival of a unicorn in an aeroplane, we should not have shown more anxiety or taken more trouble to hear about the strange creature than did they concerning myself. Their curiosity did not end here. What was Mr. Keeley doing in Mafeking? Was he fighting for the English? How many head of cattle had they on the farm? And so on ad libitum. Mrs. Keeley, however, knew her friends well and was quite capable of dealing with them, so they probably spent an unprofitable day. On another occasion, an English farmer named Leipner looked in and gave us some information about VRYBURG. This town was absolutely undefended and was occupied by the Boers without a shot being fired. The ceremony of the hoisting of the VII 27 had been attended by the whole countryside and had taken place with much psalm singing and praying, interlarded with bragging and boasting. He told me also that some of the rumours current in the town and firmly credited reported that Paul had annexed Bechuanaland, that he was then about to take Cape Colony, after which he would allow no troops to land, and the Roineks would have been pushed into the sea. His next step would be to take England. Mr. Leipner assured me the more ignorant Boers had not an idea where England was situated, nor did they know that a great ocean rolled between it and this continent. In fact, they gloried in their want of knowledge, and were insulted if they received a letter in any tongue but their own. He related one tale to illustrate their ignorance. An old burgher and his vrouw were sitting at home one Sunday afternoon. Seeing the predicant 28 coming, the old man hastily opened his Bible and began to read at random. The clergyman came in and, looking over his shoulder, said, I see you are reading in the holy book the death of Christ. Ale matchter, said the old lady. Is he dead indeed? You see, Jan, to her husband, you never will buy a newspaper, so we never know what goes on in the world. Mr. Leipner said this story loses in being told in English instead of in the original Dutch. He reiterated they did not wish for education for themselves or for their children. If the young people can read and write, they are considered very good scholars. This gentleman also expressed great satisfaction at Sir Alfred Milner and Mr. Chamberlain being at the head of affairs, which he said was the only thing that gave the colonials confidence. Even now, so many feared England would give way again in the end. I assured him of this there was no possibility, and then he said, The Transvaal has been a bad place for Englishmen to live these many years, but if Great Britain fails us again, we must be off, for then it will be impossible. I was given to understand that the Boers exhibited great curiosity as to who Mr. Chamberlain was, and that they firmly believed he had made money in Rand mining shares and gold companies. Others fancied he was identical with the maker of Chamberlain's cough syrup, which is advertised everywhere in the colony. Early in November, we had a great surprise. Mr. Keeley himself turned up from Mafeking, having been given leave from the town guard to look after his wife and farm. He had to ride for his life to escape the Boers, who were drawing much closer to the town, and the news he brought was not altogether reassuring. True, he stated that the garrison were in splendid spirits, and that they no longer troubled themselves about the daily bombardments, as dugout shelters had been constructed. The young men, he said, vied with each other in begging for permission to join scouting parties at night, to pepper the Boers often as a result, having a brush with the enemy and several casualties. All the same, they would return at a gallop, laughing and joking. There had been, however, several very severe fights, notably one on Cannon Copy, where 2 very able officers and many men had been killed. In such a small garrison this loss was a serious one, and the death roll was growing apace, for besides the frequent attacks, the rifle fire in the streets was becoming very unpleasant. Intelligence was also to hand of the Boers bringing up one of the Pretoria siege guns, capable of firing a 94-pound shell. This was to be dragged across the Transvaal at a snail's pace by a team of 20 oxen, so secure were they against any interruption from the south. Against these depressing items, he gave intelligence of an incident that had greatly alarmed the Boers. It seemed that, to get rid of 2 trucks of dynamite standing in the railway station, which were considered a danger, the same had been sent off to a siding some 8 miles north. The engine driver unhitched them and made good his escape. The Boers, thinking the trucks full of soldiers, immediately commenced bombarding them till they exploded with terrific force. This chance affair gave the Boers the idea that Mafeking was full of dynamite, and later, when I was in the laager, they told me one of the reasons why they had never pressed an attack home was that they knew the whole town was mined. Mr. Keeley also told us of a tragedy that had greatly disturbed the little circle of defenders. The very evening that the victims of the Cannon Copy fight were laid to rest, Lieutenant Murchison, 29 of the Protectorate Regiment, had, in consequence of a dispute, shot dead with his revolver at Dixon's Hotel the war correspondent of the London Daily Chronicle, a Mr. Parslow. I afterwards learnt that the court-martial which sat on the former had 14 sessions in consequence of its only being able to deliberate for half an hour at a time in the evening, when the firing was practically over. The prisoner was ably defended by a Dutch lawyer named de Kock, and owing to his having done good service during the siege, was strongly recommended to mercy, although sentenced to be shot. The most satisfactory points we gleaned were the splendid behaviour of the townspeople, and the fine stand made by.